Hello everybody, my name is Lucas, aka the Frozen Controller, and today I'm going to be talking about sideboards. So, just a brief introduction to sideboards. Sideboards in Magic are basically an extension to your deck that you can swap out for cards in the main deck to give you better matchups against other decks. And there's multiple levels to sideboarding and all that, but this is just basics. So there's three basic types of sideboard card. There's matchup dependent end cards that are just good against specific matchups. So if you play against a lot of token decks like Soul Sisters or just black-white tokens, then you might want to bring in Illness of the Ranks, which gives creature tokens -1/-1, because that's just awesome. If you're playing against a lot of aggro and burn decks, Life Goes On. Play against newer players who just play like Stompy type decks, Life Goes On is great against that, but it's also good against like super fast decks like Burn, for example. Ancient Grudge, a staple in sideboards, because it's two uses to destroy an artifact. Just a great artifact disruption card. Relic, probably one of the best pieces of graveyard hate in the format. Though Tormod's Crypt, rest in peace, both pretty good. But Relic probably sees the most play, just because it's colorless, so it can go into any deck. And despite being uncommon and being printed multiple times, it's retained a pretty hefty price tag because of the amount of play it sees. Core Firewalker, sideboard in burn for the mirror match. So, like, just 2 of in a burn sideboard. Good in any deck that runs white, just because it deals with burn really well. And Curse of Exhaustion. This is really in here as an example of a card that is really good against Storm, but anything that says is that they can't play more than one, or can't cast more than one spell each turn, things like that are just really good against Storm. So that's the first level of sideboarding, is sideboards that shut down your opponent's deck and give you a better matchup. The next level is things that deal with cards like that. So Destructive Revelry, Echoing Truth, Reality Hemorrhage, and Spell Pierce. Spell Pierce is an Echoing Truth are played in Storm, which I'll use as an example here, as they're both ways of dealing with cards like Curse of Exhaustion, and like Relic, like basically anything that stops graveyards from being a thing, or stops you from casting a ton of spells, just because bounce back to their hand or counter unless they pay 2. Basically, these are just ways to protect your combo and let it go off. Destructive Revelry is played in burn because red doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with enchantments, and Destructive Revelry deals with artifacts or enchantments and also deals damage, making it just an all-around good card. And Reality Hemorrhage, this one might seem weird to a lot of people, but it's the card that burn players bring in to deal with the burn mirror breaker. That's a lot of level. That sounds weird, but Reality Hemorrhage, while being a red in color identity, kind of, for purposes of a commander, you could only put this into a deck with red in it, but it has no color, so it can kill Core Firewalker, which is really the only reason it sees play as like a 1, maybe 2 of in a burn sideboard. But if you start seeing a lot of decks running Core Firewalker, like if you're a burn player and you start seeing a lot of decks running Core Firewalker, and you don't have access to Leyline of Punishment, or don't want to shut off your own life gain, Reality Hemorrhage deals with that quite well. So those are just a couple parts of sideboarding. You've got disruptive sideboards, you've got answers in your sideboard to those disruptive sideboards. There's also transformational sideboards. So transformational sideboards are, for an example, when you put big creatures in the sideboard of an approach deck, and maybe you take out the approaches, maybe you don't, but it becomes more of like a actual control deck, aiming to win with Azor the Lawbringer, or Cryptic Serpent, Aether Skull Agent, the new dinosaur that you can discard 3 and flicker and can't be countered and stuff. So that's the third kind of sideboard, is the transformational sideboard. I'd say probably the most commonly used version of this is Madcap Experiment with Platinum Empyrean, just thrown into the sideboard of a red deck like Storm, probably not Burn, but definitely Storm, just because then it's just rather hard to deal with if they don't expect it, which when you're playing against Storm, you really don't expect them to go with that. And this is a little more of a general thing, but board wipes. Board wipes are a mainstay in any sideboard, but they're most common in these colors here. Pyroclasm, just 2 mana, 2 damage. Anger, 3 damage. Anger is probably the best one against Dredge, just because it gets rid of it permanently. Languish, basically the next best thing if you can't afford the $20-something Damnations. So just get Languish. Wrath of God has been printed infinitely more than Damnation. Bit of hyperbole, but feels like it. Other cards that one might put in their sideboard are cards like, for instance, in Standard, if your deck doesn't do well against the gods that just keep coming back, Hour of Glory. Not only does it get rid of it, if they ended up with redundant copies, it also gets rid of those. It's not as good as what I thought it was when I first read it, but it's still good. Deadlock Trap, if your deck can't deal with Planeswalkers. I actually played this at a modern GP. And I mean, the one time I ran into a Planeswalker, I locked it down for the 2 turns I needed. If you're playing against like a Tron deck that uses Urza lands to make a bunch of mana, Ghost Quarter is probably your best friend here. And otherwise, like, just I would leave a couple slots open in your sideboard so that you can build to your meta. Like, that's why I have Gaia's Blessing in this deck, because we've had mill players at my meta. Primal Command, we've had dredge players. There's a few things missing from it. The Life Goes On and the Ancient Grudge. Disdainful Stroke, we have at least 4 people who played Tron. 5 people who played Tron. Nature's Claim, just good card. Naturalize, just a pretty decent card. Acidic Slime, surprisingly good against Tron, because it just blows up on their lands. And it's also good against 5-color decks, or decks with a greedy mana base. It would also actually be pretty good against any deck that uses those bounce lands, because it basically takes 2 turns away. Of course, most of the decks that use those aim to win on like turn 3. If you run into a lot of control decks, Leyline of Life Force, great card. If you don't want to counter any creature spells yourself. Things that stop enter the battlefield abilities are good against decks like Slivers or Allies or Titan decks, just decks that focus on creatures entering the battlefield and getting things. Path to Exile, if you don't have room for your main board, throw it in the side. Great, just 1 mana removal. Always good. Again, meta dependent. Great card against Tooth and Nail. Board wipes, always good. Answer to Planeswalkers. You always want an answer to Planeswalkers, because if you don't have an answer to Planeswalkers, then you might just lose. Hand Disruption. I forgot to put this in here. Oh, I can cover it now. Hand Disruption is good to have in your sideboard, just in case you run into a deck that your deck just isn't fast enough to beat, and you didn't have Hand Disruption in the main. Just throw it in the side. You'll be good. And this is a sideboard for 8-rack. Lingering Souls, just a good card to have in the sideboard. Just gives you a clock. Like, this is a total of 12 spirit tokens, which, 12 power with flying. You're realistically going to get between 4 and probably going to get between 4 and 6. No, between 4 and 8 every game if you get lucky on your draws. Probably about 4 is the average. But even then, that, like, 1 Lingering Souls can win you the game. Provided they don't answer it. Definitely a better, if you have the option to run any kind of hand hate, Inquisition's probably one of the best ones. Thoughtseize is better, but if you're playing a deck that you don't really want to lose a ton of life, play Inquisition. The modern format is low enough mana curve, you're not going to suffer too much. And, yeah, just Spell Pierce is good, but if you want something that, just hard counter, they can't do anything about it, Negate, just a good card. Maybe Mana Leaks in the sideboard. But there are some things that you should always throw in the sideboard. You always want an answer to graveyard decks like Dredge and Storm. You want an answer to Affinity. You probably want to answer for Burn in the current meta, although some people bring in Core Firewalker against Storm. It doesn't help that much. Like, it's not going to help you to the point where you survive. But yeah, you want answers to Storm and Dredge, you want answers to Affinity and Artifact decks, you want answers to control decks, if you can have them. Counter Magic, Land Destruction are pretty good against those. Or just something that straight up says can't be countered. Anything like that. But you also want to have answers to their answers if they have answers for your deck. Anyway, that's all I have right now for introduction to sideboarding. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you learned a little something. I don't know, maybe that'll help you with your sideboarding in the future. Just remember, no more than one gut shot.